I'm Tom, 29, just a regular guy with a love for adventure. Last summer, me and my two buddies, Chris and Ryan, decided to take a road trip across the country. Nothing crazy, just a chance to unwind, see some sights, and escape the daily grind. We were taking turns driving, stopping wherever we felt like it, with no real plan. That night, though, we ended up in the middle of nowhere. We had been on the road for hours, winding through desolate back roads in some part of Arizona, when we saw the flickering neon sign of a rundown motel. We were all exhausted, so we pulled in, hoping to crash for the night and get back on the road early in the morning. The motel was a dump. The kind of place you only stay in if you have no other choice. The sign barely worked, and the paint was peeling off the walls. But it had beds, and that was all we needed. The woman at the front desk seemed half asleep when she handed us the key to our room. Room 6, right next to another room, room 7, which looked like it hadn't been touched in years. We dumped our bags and grabbed a quick shower. We were settling in when we heard the shouting. A couple in the room next to us, their voices cutting through the thin walls. The woman was screaming at the top of her lungs, accusing the man of cheating, while he yelled back, telling her to shut up. It was loud, uncomfortably loud, and went on for what felt like hours. Chris banged on the wall a couple of times, but that only seemed to make them angrier. Finally, after what must have been half the night, the argument stopped. Silence. I figured they either worked it out or one of them stormed off. By morning, the motel was eerily quiet. I got up early to check us out, wanting to get back on the road as soon as possible. I didn't hear anything from the room next door, but that didn't surprise me. After a night like that, they were probably sleeping off their fight. I went to the front desk and saw the same woman from the night before, still looking half asleep. Hey, did the couple next to us check out already? I asked, mostly out of curiosity. The woman gave me a blank stare. There's no one in that room. I frowned. Room 7? You sure? They were arguing all night. We heard everything. She shook her head slowly. No one's been in room 7 for years. It's been closed off. Now that threw me off. I stood there for a second, processing her words, but we heard them. I mean, they were yelling all night. She just shrugged, not giving me anything more. It left a weird feeling in my gut, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was new and didn't know what she was talking about. I went back to the room, told the guys what the clerk said, and they laughed it off, thinking she was just clueless. But something about it bugged me, so I walked over to room 7. I knocked on the door. Nothing. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it wasn't locked. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The room was spotless, too spotless. The bed was perfectly made, no clothes, no bags, no sign anyone had stayed there. It smelled musty, like it hadn't been aired out in years. There wasn't a single trace of the couple from the night before. It was like they had never been there at all. My heart started racing. I backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me. When I told Chris and Ryan, they looked at me like I was crazy, but I could tell it freaked them out too. We decided to grab breakfast at a diner down the road before heading out. It was one of those small places where everyone knows everyone. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, poured our coffee and asked where we were coming from. We told her about the motel, and she stopped mid-pour, her face going pale. "Which room did you say you were next to?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. "Room 7, I said. "Why?" She set the coffee pot down and pulled out a chair. There was a couple murdered in that room years ago. They were on the run, hiding out from something. Got into a fight one night, and it ended in blood. The place was cleaned up, but no one's rented that room since. Locals say you can still hear their voices, like they're stuck there, playing out the same argument over and over. My stomach dropped. Chris and Ryan looked just as shocked as I felt. None of us said a word after that. We just ate in silence, our minds racing with the thought of what we had heard. We got back on the road, but none of us felt the same. That couple, those voices, they weren't just echoes. They were something else. Something stuck in time, trapped in that motel, reliving their final moments over and over again. And we had been right next door. I still think about them sometimes, about how close we were to something we couldn't explain. And I wonder if, somewhere in that motel, they're still arguing, their voices forever etched into the walls. My name's Liam, I'm 26, and last summer, my friends and I took a road trip that changed the way I see the world. We were just a bunch of guys looking to have some fun. Me, Mark, and Jamie. We'd planned this trip for months, mapping out a route that would take us through some of the most scenic highways in the country. We were somewhere in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town, when we saw him. It was late afternoon, and the sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the empty road. Mark was driving, and Jamie was half asleep in the backseat when I spotted the figure ahead. A guy was walking along the side of the road, his thumb out in that classic hitchhiker pose. He looked young, maybe in his early 20s, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a scruffy beard that made him seem older. Should we pick him up? I asked, not really expecting much of a response. Mark shrugged. Why not? Looks like he could use a lift. Jamie grunted something from the back, but he didn't object. So, Mark pulled over, and the guy jogged up to the car, his face breaking into a tired smile. Thanks, man, he said as he climbed into the backseat, next to Jamie. I've been walking for hours. No problem, Mark said. Where are you headed? Just the next town, if that's cool, the hitchhiker replied. He didn't offer much else, just sat there quietly, staring out the window. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just tired, I figured. But as we kept driving, I started to notice little things that made my skin crawl. He kept glancing behind us, almost like he was expecting to see someone there. His eyes were wide, and his fingers twitched nervously in his lap. Every time a car passed us, he'd tense up, his whole body going rigid. I exchanged a look with Mark, who seemed to notice it too. You okay back there? Mark asked, trying to keep his tone light. The hitchhiker nodded quickly, but his eyes didn't leave the window. Yeah, I'm fine. Just thought I saw something. What do you mean? I asked, my voice catching a bit. Saw what? The hitchhiker hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing. Forget it. But I couldn't forget it. The atmosphere in the car had shifted, going from relaxed to tense in a matter of minutes. I kept stealing glances at the guy in the rearview mirror, trying to figure out what his deal was. He didn't look dangerous, just scared, like he was running from something. Or someone. Another hour passed, the silence in the car growing heavier by the minute. I was about to ask the guy more about where he was headed when he suddenly spoke up, his voice urgent. Pull over. Please, pull over. Mark shot me a confused look, but he did as the guy asked, bringing the car to a stop on the side of the road. The hitchhiker was out of the car before we could say anything, pacing back and forth, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. What's going on? Jamie asked, fully awake now and just as freaked out as the rest of us. The hitchhiker didn't answer right away. He kept looking down the road, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Someone's following me, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to shake them, but they keep finding me. Who? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Who's following you? He didn't answer, just took off running toward the woods that lined the highway. We watched in stunned silence as he disappeared into the trees, his footsteps fading into the distance. For a few minutes, none of us said anything. We were all too freaked out to move. Finally, Mark broke the silence. What the hell just happened? I don't know, I said, my voice shaky. "But I think we should get out of here." We got back in the car and drove off, the eerie silence hanging over us like a shroud. I kept looking back, half expecting to see the guy chasing after us, but the road was empty. It wasn't until later that night, when we stopped at a diner for dinner, that we found out the truth. The place had a small TV mounted on the wall, and as we were eating, a news report came on. The anchor's voice was serious as she described a man who was on the run, a fugitive wanted for murder. They showed his picture on the screen, and my heart nearly stopped. It was him, the hitchhiker we picked up. He wasn't being followed. He was running from the law. We didn't talk much after that, just finished our meal in silence and got back on the road. But the whole thing stuck with me. I couldn't shake the image of that guy, so scared and desperate, hiding from his own past. And now, every time I pass a hitchhiker, I feel a chill run down my spine, wondering what secrets they might be hiding. It was around midnight when Donna and I pulled into a rest stop on that desolate stretch of highway. We'd have been driving for hours, with nothing but the darkness ahead of us. The rest stop was small, barely lit, with a couple of vending machines and a lonely restroom building. The place felt wrong, too quiet, too still, but Dana needed to use the restroom, and I figured it was better than nothing. "Wait here," she said, climbing out of the car. I watched her walk toward the restroom, her figure disappearing into the shadows. I stayed in the driver's seat, fiddling with the radio to break the uneasy silence that hung in the air. The only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves carried by the wind. Minutes ticked by, and Dana still hadn't come back. I checked my watch, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Maybe she was just taking her time, but my gut told me something was off. 10 minutes turned into 15, and that nagging feeling of unease turned into full-blown worry. I decided to go check on her. Grabbing my phone, I got out of the car and walked toward the restroom. The night air was colder than I'd expected, and the dim light above the door flickered ominously as I approached. I pushed open the door, calling out her name, but only silence greeted me. The restroom was empty. The stalls were all open, the only sound coming from a dripping faucet. Then I saw it, Dana's phone lying on the sink. My heart pounded in my chest. She would never leave her phone behind. Something was very wrong. Panic set in as I rushed outside, scanning the deserted rest stop for any sign of her. There was nothing. Just the empty parking lot and the dark woods surrounding us. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Just as I was about to dial 911, I heard footsteps. An older man, his face lined with age, was walking toward me from the other side of the rest stop. His expression was unreadable. "You looking for someone?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep calm. "My girlfriend. Had you seen her?" The man nodded slowly. "I saw her leave with some guy," he said. They walked off toward the woods. His words sent a chill down my spine. Dana would never leave with a stranger, not without telling me. I thanked the man and started toward the woods, but something didn't feel right. I turned back to ask him more, but he was gone. I searched the woods, calling Dana's name until my voice was hoarse, but there was no trace of her. It was like she had vanished into thin air. When the police arrived, they searched the area, but it was as if she had simply disappeared. The older man was nowhere to be found, and no one else had seen anything. Days passed, then weeks, but Donna was never found. That rest stop became a haunting memory, a place where something terrible had happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that the old man knew more than he let on, that he was hiding something sinister. Now, whenever I drive past a rest stop on a deserted road, I think of Donna. I wonder how many others have vanished, leaving behind nothing but a cold, empty silence.